Hey everybody, welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast, where we're helping ODs all over the country make better and better decisions around their money, their careers, and their practices. I am your host, Evon Mendrin, certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a financial planning firm serving optometrists nationwide. Thank you so much for listening. And on today's episode, I'm joined by my fellow financial advisor, Michael Labos. Michael is the owner of Gen X Wealth Partners and host of the Gen X Money Advisor podcast. And we talk all about how to prepare for your kids' college education. A lot of the episode talks about how to prepare for when your kids are older and closer to college age, how to pick which schools to go to, playing the game around financial aid, how different assets and income affects the financial aid calculations, and how different families should approach this. And finally, we talk about how to look at saving for college when kids are younger and when the cost of college or whether they'll even go to college at all is so uncertain. This has been a question coming up in conversations in various ways, even from younger OD parents thinking about how to best save and prepare for that, but still keep flexibility. And we're in back to school season. So hopefully this episode gives you some helpful information to plan around college, whether you're a young family or with kids much closer. And you can check out the resources mentioned in the episode in the show notes. Scroll down on whatever app you're using and you'll find your way there on the Education Hub on my website. And you can check out the other episodes, blog posts, and sign up for our weekly Eyes on the Money newsletter while you're there. A recent article we did was an OD's guide to Biden's recent student loan announcement. So check that out. I know we've had a lot of questions about the forgiveness and the new IDR income driven repayment plan. So check that out. Let me know if you have any questions. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Michael Labos. And welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast. I am your host, Evon Mendrin, and I am excited, thrilled to welcome on a peer of mine, fellow financial advisor, Michael Labos. Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
Evon, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk with you about the main topic today, education planning, because you and I both own our own firms. You own Gen X Wealth Partners, and I own Optometry Wealth Advisors, and we each serve a different demographic, and we approach education planning from different angles. And so I'm excited to talk with you about your approach and your process for helping clients plan for their kids' education. But before we dive into that, let's just get a little bit of a background. Tell us about what got you into the financial advisor profession and what ultimately led to you owning your firm?
Great questions, Evon. So let me think back here. 20 years ago. Wow. Okay. So I've always liked to solve problems, right? I wanted to be a lawyer initially, but I had the opportunity to get into the financial profession right out of college and loved it ever since. And, as you mature in your career, you learn a lot, you see a lot. And I got to the point where I recognized that there was an underserved demographic, and that demographic is Generation X. You see that everybody wants to talk to boomers about money because they have a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
And people talk about millennials a lot because we don't understand them, right? And Gen X, no one talks to Gen X because it's kind of a confusing generation. We're a sandwich generation. When does it even start? How old are you? I get that question asked a lot towards me, but no one talks to us about money. And I find that hilarious because we have all the planning needs.
Yeah.
Older parents, kids, education, career, family, everything is riding on you and nobody talks to you. But we're also, we're used to that. We're a do-it-yourself generation. But a couple of years ago, I came to the conclusion that there's an opportunity here to help a lot of people. So I launched Gen X Wealth Partners, and it's really, taken off since then.
Yeah, I love that. I can relate to that in a lot of ways, just in my my experience out of college, and then going on eventually years later to start my own firm, and just seeing a lack of help, I guess, of good advice among optometrists in the optometry profession. So I can definitely relate to that. And tell us more about who it is you serve in Gen X, and what are some of the common and consistent planning challenges that you help them face. And I know we're going to hone in on one today, but just overall, what do you see that they need help with?
Well, I could sit here and talk for hours about that. But to really look at what I would say the biggest problem Gen X has is they are not on track. They think they're on track because they still think they have time, but that time is fleeting, right? Especially, okay, Gen X, for the record, is if you're born from 66 to 80. 66 to 80. So yeah, I'll give it a couple years either way. So really 35 to 55 that's Gen X. And if you're a younger Gen X, you still might have that time. But if you're an older Gen Xer, that time is fleeting. And, there's a lot of competition with your friends and keeping up with the Joneses. So there's a lot of peer pressure because this is also your peak career years. So I think Gen X just has to, get on track. And that's their biggest problem. Now, we're going to talk about educational planning, and that's, there's Gen X at the tail end of paying for theirs, but also they're having to pay for their kids. And that's a competing goal. So education planning in Gen X's eyes is a competing goal with their own retirement. So they've got that to tackle as well. So it's getting on track, quit delaying the inevitable because you have to plan eventually, and then not sabotaging your own goals for your kids' goals.
Yeah, that's interesting. In that generation, they're trying to solve their own financial issues, and then they've got their parents, like you mentioned, they're a sandwich generation. So they've got their parents' financial concerns to sort of think about, and then also plan for their kids. One of the things is education, of course, is what we'll talk about in a little bit, but they have a lot of competing things competing for their dollars, like a lot of things competing for their what they're thinking about and stressing about and trying to put dollars toward. Whereas contrast to for me, I'm working mostly with people that are millennials. It's optometrists who are mid-career, earlier career. So they're seeing a lot of different challenges than what you're helping your clients with. And let's talk about education, because we both see education as a core part of our services and helping clients plan for that, but we approach it from different perspectives. You serving Gen X, you're helping clients plan to pay for their kids' education. So before college, essentially, or whatever higher education actually happens. For me, it's mostly helping optometrists after college sort out what to do now with the pretty hefty amount of student loans that they've incurred by taking on that education. So we both have letters after our name, it's having gone through an education to plan for that. We both see that as core to our services. What are some of the main planning challenges or some of the main things that Gen X clients should be thinking about as they approach this topic of helping their kids plan for higher education?
Managing expectations, I think. And what I mean by that is colleges, the costs are varied, right? They could be super expensive or they could be affordable. Brand name, not brand name. And I think it's about managing the expectation of both the parent and the child to set them up for success, academically, personally, ultimately professionally, and financially. And I think that's so crucial. I see a lot of times I talk to kids, oh, where do you want to go to school? Now I'm out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, for out here, I want to go to Penn State, or I want to go to Ohio State, or I want to go to Pitt. These are big schools. They're good schools, but I think they just get stuck on brand name schools. And if they would broaden their scope a little bit, they could uncover a lot of gems and a lot of free money out there. And the parents, they want to, in this topic, parents are very, very giving. They will sacrifice their own futures for their child's. I see it all the time. And I joke with parents and I say, there are student loans out there, but there's no such thing as called a retirement loan that I'm aware of. It doesn't exist. Right. So it's really about establishing expectations, and how I tackle that. The first thing that I have parents do is to develop a college budget. And effectively, that is how much can they afford based upon their current finances without taking on any debt. The optimal price for college is free, right? But I think the next best thing would be to be able to afford something without taking on any debt. Mm-hmm. And it's an achievable goal. You can't do that, but you can't do it alone. And that's why I said to myself, I need to take this on and learn how I can help families, set themselves up for success and not get crushed by expectations.
So where do these expectations come from in terms of what colleges students should be trying to get into, and where do all those expectations come from?
I think there's a lot of stigmas in college planning. What I mean by that is, I went to a private high school, and everybody from my class went to college, right? Mm-hmm. So that if you didn't go to college, or you don't go to college, you're looked at as this, he's not going to be successful, she's not going to be successful. So I think it starts there. And, at school, guidance counselors do the best they can, but they're not going to, they're going to help you pick schools that you would love to attend, but they're not going to have that discussion about how can you afford this? Can your parents afford this? What type of debt is this going to, put you in? So I think, given those two dynamics, sometimes people have unrealistic expectations, and they get stuck in this mindset of, I have to go to school and I have to go to a big school because that's what everybody does. And if I don't, then people aren't going to look at me the same, and a lot of pressure there.
Yeah. And in terms of the approach to helping their kids pay for it, whether it's paying out of the parents' pocket, whether it's allowing the kids to sort of do it on their own and get scholarships or take loans, how much does, I guess, family values or like family history play into that? Like how important the parents feel about college? Like how much does all that more intangible values or family history stuff impact how parents plan for their kids' college? Or is it all about the financial stuff?
Well, I think any parent wants their kid to go to a good school and be set up to have a successful career. And they might look at themselves. My parents, they both went to school. But I still think it goes back to that stigma that if you don't go to school, you aren't as smart or you won't be successful. But I can tell you that, and you can probably say the same thing, that we have clients that did not go to school and are very successful, right? But I think, looking at, when I get started talking to parents, the first thing we do is we establish this college budget, right? And one of the key numbers there is what they call an expected family contribution. That number is how much colleges think you can afford, right? That's how much they think, this guy, he can pay this, or this family can pay this. And what I help parents and families do is to reduce their expected family contribution, because the name of this game, and it is a game for our discussion here today, it's to maximize your financial aid. Find that school that's going to give you the most money. And I'll ask you a question, Evon. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but just want to see how you would answer this. What type of school do you think is the most generous? Private, public?
I would guess private, actually.
That is correct. That is correct.
So in terms of the aid provided, or at least the ticket, the sticker price reduced, that most of that aid is going to come from a private college versus a public.
Yeah. Think about it this way. So let's see. Let's pick a school here. Harvard. Okay. And we'll compare that to Penn State. You apply at Penn State's going to have a certain cost of a tuition, and there's really not a whole lot of wiggle room there. It's a state school, state funded. There's not a lot of wiggle room. But the face value, the price of tuition at Harvard is obviously going to be more expensive, right? But Harvard is very generous if you meet certain criteria. another school, and Ivy Leagues are, where we typically have this discussion, but it doesn't have to be an Ivy League school for it to be private. It could be a, local private school, but they're going to be more expensive, and they know that. So to compete with the Penn States, they have to drop their price. And that's going to come to students in the form of financial aid, grants, which are the best because that's free money, but they have to be competitive. So that's why I say get away from the name brands. There's a lot of good schools out there that on face value look like you can't afford them, but they actually might be cheaper than the Penn States of the world.
So that managing expectations actually goes both ways. Like you also want to make sure that they look at schools that may seem unattainable on the ticket price, but the net cost is actually pretty reasonable after all the aid and reductions and all that. You talked about the EFC, the expected family contribution, and there may be a thought by some many optometrists, especially those who are practice owners, high income families, that feel like they're probably their kids are not eligible for financial aid, and so is it worth it? Should those families fill out the FAFSA, continue to see what's out there, what's available to them? Or is there a place where they should try to approach that from different directions?
You should always fill that out. Always. Okay. Always. But when I look at that discussion, there's a path for maximizing financial aid for every family. And there's really 4 types of families out there. There's a high merit, low need family. So really smart, underprivileged student. And for them to maximize their financial aid, for example, they need to receive as much non-need merit aid, private scholarships, picking the right school, improving your grades. And then there's also ways to work on your financials. There's also a low merit, low need household. And that's really going to be based upon picking the right school and getting your grades up. A high merit, high need household, they need to get as much merit aid as they can. And like a school like Harvard, they might get 100% free. Private scholarships, you can always do test prep, but then there's also EFC reduction. And then lastly, low merit, high need, and they're going to get, all of their money given to them, hopefully, 100% needs met, but you can also reduce the EFC. And then getting an application in timely, right? There's different times to apply, early admission, right? If you really want to go to these schools, because schools have quotas. They have quotas to fill. And think about it. If you can get someone to sign up early to start filling your quota, you're probably going to say, yes, accept it. Even if they're borderline. Okay, yeah, great. That's one more towards our quota. So time when you apply for schools is also an important part of the equation.
Interesting. Can you tell us more about that? Like how does the timing impact? I mean, how early or how late are we talking? Is there a certain time of year, certain month of the year? What does that look like?
Sure. So I'll use myself as an example. Yeah. I went to Indiana University. Okay. And I guess I should just jump into this story. It's about myself and I know pretty well. So I was a junior, graduated, and that summer I went and took a tour of some schools. Now my parents, they gave me a 500-mile radius. So this is, the late 90s. We didn't have, the internet wasn't as robust. So I got my Princeton review. I'm getting a compass out there, drawing a 500-mile radius on my map. Indiana was like 400 miles away. I was like, let's go check that school out. So I go check out the campus. I wanted, you're 18 years old, 17 years old. You don't know what you really want, I don't think. But I wanted good sports. Bobby and I was coaching there. I wanted a good business school. They had it, and it was far enough for my parents that I felt like I had a buffer zone, but it was within their confines. So crossed off a lot of my boxes. I didn't even really consider cost. It was not discussed with my parents and I. So it didn't matter to me. I got in early admission. I applied early. I was accepted before I started my senior year. How cool did I feel? I decided to graduate. I felt awesome. But I got in, and that's my story. So when you're looking at applying to schools, there's always going to be a few types of schools, right? There's going to be what I call your dream school, right? There's going to be your safe school. And then there's going to be like your target school. So I guess in the end it was all three. But if you had a dream school, so let's say, I don't know, you wanted to go to Princeton and you're borderline, but if you got in, you know you'd go there, you maybe apply early. Now, when you do apply early, if you get accepted, you have to accept it. You cannot decline it. So you have to consider that. But if you have a dream school, I would apply early admission. And your safe schools, your target schools, you can apply regular admission. But your dream schools, you might want to apply for early admission.
How much does a college being in-state versus out-of-state, how much does that weigh in this decision of where to go? Is it purely financial? I mean, what does that factor in?
It factors in a little bit. I mean, obviously in-state's going to be cheaper than out-of-state. But whenever my clients and I are compiling a list of schools to apply to, if you want to, again, this is a game and this is about maximizing financial aid. If you want to extract as much value as you can, you need to compile a list of schools that compete against each other. A fallback way of doing this is kind of looking at conferences, right? Big Ten, ACC, Pac-10, right? If you applied to these schools and got accepted to one of these, that might give you some dry powder to use down the road to say, hey, UCLA, are you going to offer me as much as USC did? Interesting, right? And you see how much they might match it, right? So you can pit schools against each other. So if you have, we'll go back to East Coast. If you have Ohio State and Penn State, right? You really want to go to Penn State. Hey, Ohio State offered me this much money. Will you match it? They might. So it's about not only, or here, I'll even use an example like Pitt. If you want to go throw a third school in there, you have no desire to go to Pitt whatsoever, but you know that you can get in there, get an offer. You could use that offer against those two other schools to see what they can do. So you might apply to schools that you might have no interest in attending, but it's part of the game, part of the process, because they all have quotas to fill. And, the in-state, out-of-state tuition, it's going to vary, but you have to do the math and you have to, see what offers you can get. Yeah, that's interesting, pitting different offers against each other, just like everything else. Potentially you can negotiate using competing offers. And back to that game and that the EFC calculation, from what I understand, different assets and the people that own the assets, whether it's parents, kids, grandparents, and also income sources, like they all impact that EFC financial aid calculation a little differently. Can you talk to us about like how we should think about that, how ownership or income affects that calculation? Sure. Yeah. So don't have assets in your kids' names. Okay. Easy. Okay. That's really, we joke about that, but yeah, you probably don't want to have a lot of assets in your kids' names because those are counted more heavily than a parental asset. And there's also strategies as to when to use these assets. And as an example, let's say that your grandparents have a 529 account. And if you use that in your freshman or sophomore year, that's going to count against you for your junior and senior year, because that asset's not counted at least for 2 years. So if you have grandparent-owned 529 accounts, you want to use those for your junior and senior years but you then have graduated, and those are never held against you in a negative sense. So how you have accounts titled is super important. Always have it in the parent's name. More often than not, use grandparent assets in the junior and senior years. But, it's looking at everything on a piece of paper and saying, what's your spend down strategy going to be, right? And that's another, that's more towards the end of the process. Once you've accepted everything and looked at, here we go. Here's how there's a school I'm going to attend. All right, now how do I use my assets to pay this down? That's That's one of the last steps of the process. But yeah, you don't want to be silly about it and just have accounts titled in your kids' names or using assets whenever, because that might not be to your best advantage.
Yeah, and that's interesting because for a lot of us, I mean, we think about college planning as just, hey, let's just open up a 529 and then we'll just use that and that'll be that. But there's a lot more that goes into it. Is it the parents' 529? Should it be the grandparents' 529? What years should we pull from one of the accounts or the other? There's a lot more maneuvering that comes with that decision. And when should parents and students like really start to think about this discussion, like about preparing for kids' college and preparing for when they might decide what schools to go to? Like when does this whole thing start?
Well, just like any other planning, the earlier the better. So I recently took on a client and they have a newborn. So we started planning for her college today. So early on in the process, it's more about just putting money away for it, right?
Yeah.
Kind of estimating expected costs and working towards a goal. Okay. You really can't do a whole lot of planning until you get to high school, because you don't know what, the strength of the student. You have to let the student mature a little bit to kind of get their own personality, where they might want to go, what they want to study. But really the process starts in earnest, I would say, your sophomore year. And that's when I, talk to the parents and we start to determine the college budget and also develop what I call the college criteria, which is, like I said, how far away from home do you want to go? Is this going to be an urban, rural? What do you want to study? The strength of the schools. And then you develop your list of schools. And that's when you start to do the expected family contribution calculations to determine, where you sit. And then you can manage those expectations. You can give your child, okay, we can afford, just making this up, $100,000. We have $25,000 a year budget for you. And anything above that, we're going to have to talk about taking on some debt. And it's educating the client, the student, as to how that's going to impact them in the future too. Because I didn't have any of that. I took on my last year of education, which was about $25,000 in student loans. Very fortunate, but I had no idea how that was going to impact me, and it took me a long time to pay those off. So I think it's educating the students and letting them make an educated decision too, seeing the cost, seeing the sticker price, seeing what extra value that's going to obtain, because you don't want this just to be a really expensive party, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I, from my perspective, it's usually is conversations with younger families. And at that point, we really are just starting to save, because it's impossible to know where are they going to go to college? What are their interests going to be? Are they going to go to college? Are they going to go into a trade? Like, it really is impossible to even project out what that might be priced, like, or anything that far into the future.
I get conflicted on it too, because at the beginning, so we all, as advisors, we're very familiar with 529 accounts and how they benefit, right? You put the money in, you get state tax deduction, it grows tax deferred. And then for qualified expenses, it's tax free, right? What if they don't go to college? Well, then it's like an IRA, then you got penalties. And what if you had just put the money into a joint account for the parents and let it grow, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to get the tax deductions, but you can use it for whatever you want. Or you could also use cash value life insurance. You could overfund policies, early on, have those grow tax deferred like a Roth IRA, but take it out tax free. So there's lots of ways to approach this. And the fact that we can't predict the future, that's why I'm conflicted. So it's really best case, you do the best you can.
Yeah. And I was going to actually ask about that, because I think about that too, is that where is that balance between leaning so heavily on a 529 plan with all of the tax benefits that comes with that, especially over really long term? You can allow it to grow and compound and come out tax free, but you don't know what that student is going to do. You don't know whether they'll go to college, what even college will cost in the future. I mean, it seems unsustainable that the inflation rate on college costs will be as high as it is 20 years from now, as it is now. So where do you usually see, or I mean, what do you think that balance is between leaning on the 529 and investing in something like a taxable brokerage account? Like how do you have conversations with clients about that? What are your own thoughts, in that whole topic?
Well, the nice thing about the 529 account, it's a parental asset, so it's not going to be counted as heavily as a child's asset would be, and anybody can contribute to it, right? Which is nice. But 529 accounts they're kind of limited in terms of what you can do. You can only make changes, I think, twice a year to reallocate a portfolio. And if you're in imagine having a child 4 years out in a market like this, and the account's grown pretty decently, but you can only change your portfolio twice.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. That's kind of scary. There's some limitations with the 529 account. Yes, it's portable. You can transfer it between, siblings. But there's some limitations there. The brokerage account, you're giving up some tax advantages, but you've got unlimited flexibility. You can use it for whatever you want. Let's say the kid just gets scholarships, doesn't need it. Maybe you can give that to him as a reward, right? For studying hard or whatever, right? They can use it for, a down payment on a house, a car, kickstart their retirement, whatever they want, right? So I think it's just a matter of, doing the best you can. I fall back upon that because you just can't predict the future. So I think it comes down to education as well. It's letting the parents know, here's the upside, here's the downsides. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's just, that's a tough sort of decision because you don't know the future. And I think balance is sort of the key word there is, yes, use a 529, give yourself the benefit of that tax deferral and the tax-free withdrawals, but you can also just use a regular brokerage account, invest, and just consider that a fund for your children. And whether it's for college, whether it's for a down payment on a house or a wedding or whatever it may be, you can repurpose that for their benefit in whatever way you need to.
And one other account that it depends upon how old the parent is, but you can do a Roth IRA too. Yeah. If the parent's going to be older, right, you could fund a Roth and you could take out money from a Roth tax-free. So if the parent's a little older, that could also be a viable option and get that tax deferral and tax-free distribution.
Interesting. Yeah. It's it just depends on where you're at, what age you're at when kids are going to get started.
Parents are getting started later. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. So what other takeaways should parents, take away from this conversation as they look at planning for their own kids' college? What are some other things they need to be thinking about?
You need to start thinking about, hiring someone like Evon or myself to help you with this, because you're not going to get you're not going to get the help you need at school because they can't have the discussions that they need to be having. They might start the discussion, but you need someone like myself or Evon to go through the financials with you, because this is, I think, unnecessarily complicated. And people, I think, spend way too much on school, way too much. And I hear parents, it's almost like a badge of honor. And I hear it, I hear people talk about, oh, my son daughter's going to XYZ school. Yeah, okay, that's great. You're spending $65,000, $70,000 a year for something you could probably get for 20, 25, 30 at a very comparable school. So don't get stuck, trying to keep up pace with the Joneses. The Joneses, they're going to have student loan debt. The smart parents are going to have minimal debt. And I have a system that I've put together that can help save you thousands of dollars in time and effort and help your kid understand the process all the way through. Briefly, I put myself through the same process. I mentioned earlier, I went to Indiana University and I went down my whole process. I put together a college budget. I used my parents. I inflated all my data from when I was 18 to today's numbers. I wrote down my needs, my parents' needs, what I wanted to study. I went through this whole process. And long story short, I would not have gone to Indiana University. I would have gone to University of North Carolina in Wilmington. And I would have, if I took all the money I would have saved and invested it, my parents did that, our familial wealth would have been about $330,000 to today. And this is what I talk about, finding schools that are less expensive that will give you very similar opportunities. The expected income for a business degree from IU Bloomington and UNC Wilmington is negligible. It's actually negligible. And one of my dream schools was UNC Chapel Hill. Who's to say that I didn't go to UNC Wilmington for 2 years, do really well, and then I could get into UNC Chapel Hill, right? Mm-hmm. So I could have backdoor into UNC Chapel Hill. But the point is not to get caught up on brand name schools. Do your due diligence, and there's lots of good schools out there that will be very happy to give you money. So that's it.
So I was gonna start wrapping up, but you just opened up a few other questions that I want to get into a little bit.
Okay.
How much should parents think about, or students, if students are able to start wrapping their mind around it, but how much should they think about college as an investment, and the degree that they're getting and the amount that they're paying for it as the cost and return on their investment? I mean, how much should that play into the decision on which school they're going into, which major they're going to be majoring in, what are the job prospects for that major? Like, what does that all look like in terms of thinking of it like an investment and return on investment?
It's a good question. To answer it simply, I would say if you're going to study something very technical, and that would also necessitate a graduate degree, I would more be focused on spending money on the graduate degree than the undergraduate degree. I also don't advocate majoring in something like Sanskrit, right? You need something that has applicability.
Yeah.
Right? But recognize that if you want to go into a career that historically does not have a lot of earning power, then maybe you don't want to spend a ton of money on college.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, someone in that capacity, then you're going to want to look at it as more as an investment, but more so even on the graduate degree. And if you want to go major in something that's a passion of yours, that's not really a high earning profession, then maybe you don't spend as much.
Yeah. And for optometrists, I mean, it's a profession with certain education requirements. So they definitely should be seeing their education as an investment, and the opportunities, whether it's owning a private practice or just practicing somewhere as an associate, there's a whole lot of opportunities that education opened the door for. But for their kids, I mean, that everything Michael just said is, I think there's a lot to think about there in terms of what majors your kids are going to go for, and is there even a financial opportunity for that line of work down the road, and is it worth the ticket price that you may be paying for that, whether it's in student loans, whether it's in out of pocket education, whether it's in student aid. And you mentioned a sort of a back door, and how often does community college and other schools like that come up in your discussions, and getting the first 2 years out in a community college setting and then going into a 4-year university after that?
Yeah. So you see that strategy utilized with, I think, some students that need to prove themselves, right? If maybe they underachieved in high school and their grades they could get into a school, but it's not a very good school. So maybe it will be better for them to go and prove themselves, apply themselves, and then after a couple of years, go and apply to a better school, right? It's also when people can't afford. You see that a lot to keep the costs down. And we have to destigmatize these things, right? And there's nothing wrong with going to a community college and getting some credits and maturing as a student, because maybe you're also not mature enough for it either, right? Maybe you need some, people mature at different ages. So I don't see anything wrong with that. It definitely would save money, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious if there's a downside. It does seem like just a less expensive way to get eventually into the college that you'd like, at least in those first 2 years. And I do like what you said earlier, that you're right. It is overly complicated, and college is way too expensive. I look at it from the other side. I look at it from the student loan side, and it is incredibly complicated to figure out which direction you should go with your student loans, whether paying it down to zero or using an income-driven repayment plan. And if you're doing that, whether you're married, whether your spouse works, whether your spouse has federal loans, like there's so many factors that make it so complicated. I don't know how families make these decisions on their own.
And laws are always changing.
And you don't get help from a high school counselor or frankly from your federal aid office. I worked in a financial aid office when I was in college. They're not equipped to give you that kind of advice. They're just not. They can't.
No.
So,
You sound like me. I'm so cynical.
Yeah.
Why is this so complicated? Why? When something is this complicated, the fact that we can sit here talking about this for as long as we have, and we still just scratched the surface, tells you all you need to know.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
I know some optometrists I've had conversations with recently are nodding their heads. The cost is sort of outrageous. And I was just talking with my wife, like there should not need to be a whole curriculum to teach you about student loans, like just how to pay off debt from school. Like there should not need to be whole businesses set up to give you advice around that. But that's just the system we have, and we have to navigate it as best as we can. So I definitely agree. Please reach out to someone like Michael or myself to help you navigate all these different decisions. And Michael, I really appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. There's a lot to learn from here. There's a lot that happens before college. I mean, there's a lot that happens in those key 2 to 4 years just before college, and figuring all that out. So appreciate your time today. And where can people find you, follow you, learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. Yes. First off, yes. Thank you for having me on here, Evon. Super important topic. And I will say this, when you work with a financial advisor, it's areas like this where you're going to get the most value from us. It's not actually us managing that asset. It's from the planning. It's how much money can we save you, right? So take advantage of that. You can find me at my website, which is www.genxwealthpartners.com. My podcast is called The Gen X Money Advisor. That's available where all your top podcasts are available. And you can email me at michael@genxwealthpartners.com if you have any questions. I'd be happy to chat with you about this, because it's an important topic. And I get all fired up because it's people like Evon and I who are trying to help you guys save money and get your kids in the best position as possible.
Yep. We'll put all that in the show notes. Michael, you were kind enough to have me on your podcast recently, so I'll make sure to put that. And that episode, you and I talked about the importance of working with someone that specializes in a particular demographic. And you and I each have our own group of people that we serve. So I'll put all that in the show notes. And again, Michael, thank you for the listener. Really appreciate your time today. And we will see you on the next episode. Take care.
Want more resources to help master your money? Check out the Education Hub on Evon's website at optometrywealth.com. Evon Mendrin is a certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a California registered investment advisor. All opinions of Evon and his guests are their own. This show is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for specific investment, legal, tax, or other decisions. Clients of OWA may own securities mentioned on this show.